Dear friends, thank you very much for being with us. I'd like to personally first thank the organizers for inviting me to be the chair of this panel in this last day of this historic and memorable ninth conference on bioethics. We have had some changes in the program. Some we will be telling you on the go, but before that, I would like to introduce Laurence Azou-Bakri. She's a French professor. She was on the program already. She's a lawyer of the Court of Paris. She's a bioethics lecturer and mediator, and she will be speaking about violence against women, a multidisciplinary approach of a lawyer. And Professor Gonzalo Miranda will be doing a consecutive interpreting into Spanish, but you can continue listening into the English channel. We're sorry. I would like to thank Marcelo and Lucia for the invitation, but I have a problem. Fatima Ikari, who is a criminology professor of molecular biology, to tell this text is not here, so I will try to read the text with Gonzalo Miranda. Good morning. I'm not going to speak myself.
Sí, ahora sí. Voy a traducir.
I'm just going to interpret, and fastly because I have to leave, because I have to catch my train in a few minutes. And this is by Fatima Zora. Her presentation is the fight against violence against women and the girl children, the daughters in Algeria, and the Kigali Declaration. In her introduction, she says, conflict, violence, disease, HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, poverty are common challenges to all Africans, for all Africans. The continuous cycle of violence makes Africa a continent filled with feelings and emotions that are not understood, afflicted by conflict between different nations, and with religious communities that are fighting against each other, lead to violence against women. On 18th to 20th April 2005, there was a meeting in South Africa during the second interreligious meeting for peace in Africa of the Interreligious Group for Peace in Africa. The Mothers and Daughters of Africa, that's the title, the name of an institution, articulated their vision about a healthy and prosperous Africa. And this led to a campaign called the Cry of a Mother for a Healthy Africa. I was there in this meeting in South Africa, and in that meeting there was a discussion about violence against women and women's issues. And we were trying to eliminate that scourge that has physical, mental, and emotional effects, and a threat to their potential and their empowerment. Looking back at the recommendations of this convention that was approved, this declaration approved by the members of the meeting, the delegates of the meeting, this campaign, the Cry of a Mother for a Healthy Africa, was introduced, and it was later discussed in Kigali in Rwanda on 1st July 2006. On 25th November 2008, we had 16 days of activism on the elimination of all forms of violence, and this was developed from November 25th to December 10th. That was from the day of the elimination of all forms of violence against women. And this campaign tried to increase awareness about violence against women and bring this violence to an end. The message was to show that this violence, gender violence, is against fundamental human rights. The topic of the year 2008
eslogan
was
Derechos del hombre
under the
para las
slogan.
mujeres, derechos del hombre para todos. La campaña, a través de un fórum, tenía por finalidad eliminar todas las formas de violencia contra las mujeres, estableciendo una una conexión entre la sensibilización y a la antiviolencia local e internacional, a fin de poner en lugar estrategias, de realizar estrategias para desarrollar la solidaridad de las mujeres en el mundo que se organiza contra la violencia basada sobre el sexo. Después de esta reunión de Kigali, el AIPA realizó un Consejo de Mujeres en el seno de su secretariado. En 2014 tuvo lugar la cuarta Asamblea de
Secretariat,
Kigali en Ruanda,
and then there's an
que
assembly
aplicó
in
a
Rwanda,
todos
in
los países
Kigali,
africanos
and this
y
encouraged all
debatió
European,
sobre la violencia
all
contra las
African
mujeres.
countries to discuss gender
Fue
violence.
seguida por la quinta Asamblea General,
After that,
cuyo
there
presidente
was
Laurent
a fifth
Desire se
assembly
sucedió a Ruanda y ha sido
in
dirigida
Nigeria,
desde entonces
and
desde la cuarta Asamblea, ya fue proclamada desde la cuarta
there
Asamblea.
is a new meeting already
Luego el
planned
apartado
after the fourth
destacó
assembly.
de los lugares en Argelia.
And we have
Apartado
to look
institucional.
now at the
La
situation in
reivindicación de las
Algeria.
mujeres en Argelia
The situation of
tienen
women
tres
in
aspectos.
Algeria
Se suceden después de muchos años
and the recognition of their rights
y
happens
han
after
hecho,
many years,
han logrado hacerse escuchar.
and at last they have made themselves
Las
heard.
denuncias depositadas por mujeres contra la violencia basada
Women have claimed
han vuelto
against, the complaints
incrementar.
have gone up from 6,000 to
Existe un centro de
9,000
protección de
in a
ciudadanos
year.
y
There's a
mujeres
child and
bajo
women's
dirección de la
protection
policía
sector
judicial.
by the
La
police, at the
comisaria
police,
judicionaria es una
and the
mujer,
police commissioner
lo que
is a
refleja
woman.
una toma de
And this
conciencia
shows
social
how
genuina.
society in Algeria
El trabajo
have
de los
become
oficiales de
aware
la
of this.
policía y de las fuerzas
Outreach work by the
pacificadoras
police
de
force
las
and
fuerzas
new
pacificadoras
laws
en
to protect
Argelia,
women in Algeria
cuya dirección general es de la Seguridad Nacional,
under national
ha contribuido
security,
fuertemente a
has
su realización y puesta en
managed
práctica y
to
ha
implement those
reconocido
laws and has
todas las
encouraged women,
formas
victims of all
de
forms of
la
violence, to file
totalmente por todas las formas de
complaints
violencia.
of all kinds.
Algeria ha realizado avances
Algeria has
considerables
made
en
much
materia de
progress in
legislación,
terms of the legislation,
sobre todo desde la
especially
aprobación en el Senado el 26 de
after the Senate on 10th December 2015 passed a law against violence against women.
hace 9 meses o 9 meses
And
después
9 months
solo para la
afterwards,
Asamblea Popular.
this was also
Algeria
passed by the
igualmente
General
tomó sus
Assembly.
frutos en la
Algeria
puesta en
has also made many
práctica
efforts
de un
to
programa,
implement a
del programa de la
program
Unión Africana,
by the
y el respeto de los
African Union
compromisos y de las agendas africanas
and
de 2020
to
y
respect
de
the African Agenda for
2063,
2020
concerniendo
and
la
for
promoción de los
2063
derechos del hombre en
to
general y de las
promote
personas
human rights in general
LGBTI+.
and for women's rights in particular.
Algeria ratificó la
Algeria
CEDAW
ratified
en
CEDAW
1971 y participando en el
in 1971,
Convenio
and on
de
22nd January
1966
1966
contra la
took
discriminación
part
de todas
in
las
the
formas
Convention on the
y todas las
Elimination of all forms of
de las mujeres,
discrimination
adoptó
of
algunos
women,
textos que
and
tienen
they
una
adopted
reforma
in
avanzada en
1970.
1979
This
por la
was
ONU.
adopted by the UN in
Había emitido algunas
1979, and it has Algeria had
de la
expressed some
Convención
reservations
Universal sobre los Derechos de
regarding
la Mujer,
some
editadas por
provisions,
los artículos 2,
especially
15,
Article 2, 15,
16 y
16,
19 de esta
29
Convención,
of this
incidentes hacia los
convention that
derechos de
had
la
to do
mujer
with
en el ámbito
several
económico,
aspects of daily
profesional y
life
de igualdad
that had to
de
do
todos
with
los
the
sexos.
rights of women and
Estas
equality.
reservas llevan o llevaban
These
otros tipos de
caveats
reservas. Primero, la
were
reciprocidad de
related
los
to
derechos de las
provisions that
mujeres
had to do with
contra
women's
los
rights and
hombres,
equality between men and
normas
women, marriage,
internacionales y
nationality,
arbitraje internacional.
and
La quinta
international
Asamblea General de la
arbitration.
Declaración de
And the
Kigali
fifth
fue organizada en
provision
Algeria
of the
el 11
Kigali
de
Declaration,
marzo de
the
2016
meeting was again
bajo el
organized
patronazgo
in
del
Algeria
presidente de la
in
República,
2016 under the
la
presidency of the
presidencia
President of the Republic,
aproximadamente 8 o 7 días
and Algeria
y Ruanda fue
was the
seguida
country in
de la
charge
cuarta
after
asamblea
Rwanda, and this was a
general.
decision made in the
Estas
fourth
jornadas fueron
assembly,
organizadas
as I
por el
said
Secretario
before.
General
This
de la
meeting was
Seguridad
organized
Nacional
by the
y
General
coincide también con la
Secretariat for National
celebración de la
Security,
cuarta
and this
Asamblea de
was
la
also
Mujer,
during
cuya
the
objetivo
during World
de
Women's
lectura fue
Day,
presidida
and the opening was presided over by the president of Algeria and Ban Ki-moon, the UN's General Secretary. The president of Algeria, during the International Women's Day on 8 March 2016, in his speech, said, "I want to make a direct call to all organizations and stakeholders to understand the reservations of Algeria that in the CEDAW, so that we can bring Algerian legislation in line with international conventions. And then, in order to protect women's rights, we have to highlight as well that Algeria
Sí, no encuentra o no se encuentra en algunos artículos que no están
in
conformes a la
Algeria, we do not. There are some articles that are not in line with the Muslim religion. And Article 2 of the Algerian Constitution states that Islam is the religion of the state. And for the President of the Republic, these provisions have to be respected according to Islamic law. The fact that the Fifth General Assembly of the Kigali Declaration was held in Algeria is of great relevance, and it was also the outcome of the supplementary efforts made by those involved, and it is also translated in a commitment towards the efforts that are already in place by the police force and national security, who are trying to promote women's rights. Algeria is amongst the pioneering countries in terms of the introduction of the UN resolutions on women's rights and children's rights and other social categories. Besides, the conference has witnessed many international names and national names, and we've also had representatives of African police, UN representatives in Algeria, UN Women in its African section, apart from 2 members of the Secretariat and the representatives of the UN Fund, the UN Population Fund, and the High Commissioner for Refugees. During the second day of this assembly, we heard the Minister for National Solidarity, Family and Women's Issues. We had the general, the representative of UNPD for Algeria, and the representative of the African Union. They all highlighted the importance of women's role in society as an active role, and the Secretary of Algerian Women's Association highlighted how important it was for constitutions to include women's rights as it is in Algerian constitution. The work of the Swiss Assembly reviewed the situation of women's rights in Algeria and also the legislation system that was recently consolidated by an amendment of the criminal code, leading to new measures to fight against all forms of violence against women. And then there were some revisions or some presentations about the different experiences of African countries in the field of violence against women and girls. For 2 days, we had participants exchanging information and experiences about this matter, and they also introduced the reforms of the police force in Africa and in terms of the fight against and prevention of gender violence. This was also supported by the Algeria platform, which establishes the main guidelines to fight against violence against women and against girls, and that shed some light on the measures taken. This platform, the so-called Algeria platform, defined some common action to fight against violence against women, and it has also called for a higher implication of men in the protection of women. And it highlighted the role of women in the socioeconomic development of all countries. To begin with, violence against women needs to have societies that are active, and also better cooperation between Pan-African and international police forces, so that we can create, so that we can establish a police cooperation network in Africa, AfriPol. And that's it. That's what Dr. Fatima Sora wanted to share with you. I apologize for the impromptu translation that I had to do. It was a little bit difficult for me to do that, but anyway, this is the vision that we got from the professor, and we see how things are improving in African countries.
No está con nosotros.
If any of you would like to make a comment or give an opinion, make some reflections about this presentation. I have two things to say. One for the president of the conference. Today, the conference will send a letter to the Argentinian embassy supporting the demonstrations of Argentinian women who are today demonstrating against gender violence. That's the first thing I wanted to say. I'm sure that we will approve that unanimously. And then, for the speaker, we are not familiar with the world of Islam, except for the typical cliches that we hear about in the media here. I'd like to ask about the aspects, the reluctancy that Algeria has expressed and the caveats about supporting gender violence. So what are the contradictions of that? What are the concrete examples that are a contradiction between, or difficult for them to reconcile between Islamic law in Algeria and women's rights? Would you like to make a comment about that?
Particular comment.
En ese caso, ¿algún otro?
So, are there any other questions? We could have a few minutes for Fatima's presentation if you want to discuss anything. We're sorry, but if the speakers don't use a microphone, we cannot translate whatever they're saying. As she's not here, then this is very difficult for us to ask anything because the speaker is not here, so we will just keep our thoughts to ourselves. Okay, so if that's the case, we'll now give the floor to Laurence Azebakri from France. She will be speaking about, she was supposed to be speaking first. She will be speaking about violence against women, a multidisciplinary approach from a lawyer's perspective. You have the floor now. Good morning. I'd like to thank Marcelo and Lucia for their invitation and for the generosity that they have had, and for this wonderful and successful organization of Beatriz and her colleagues. I will be now speaking about the point of view of a lawyer, of a mediating lawyer. By saying first that the quality of a society is measured by the way in which it treats its women. This comes from the International Committee on Bioethics, Women's Rights and Bioethics of 2012. health and human rights and bioethics, a new generation of human rights, an ethical approach to eradicate violence, respecting the life and integrity, physical integrity of women. First, France, we have to say that was quite reluctant to introduce legislation against gender violence. Secondly, Europe has much to do with the European Court, with anything stemming from the European Court. So France joins this international movement with important stages at the level of international law. We have to first think that violence is, if we try to provide a description or a summary of violence, we see that there's disquieting figures or statistics about complaints. And we had a report published on 19th April by the High Commission for Equality between Men and Women. And they reported that 10% of women are victims of violence in intimate partnerships in France. 216,000 women between 18 years of age and 75 years of age suffer physical or sexual violence. Only 16% of victims ever report to the police. The economic cost, yearly economic cost, is 250,000 euros. 400,000 women are victims of violence in intimate partnership in the past, have been victims of intimate violence in intimate partnership in the past 2 years. So we need to have a comprehensive ethical perspective also in its approach. Women themselves have to be part of policies of social, economic, and cultural policies. The objective is to provide health protection and to avoid discrimination. The vision of a lawyer is that violence in any degree should not be tolerated, but it should be there should be compulsory complaints about this. No declared violence should be left without a social health and community response. What about mediators? We have to comfort women and help them restore their dignity and ensure their physical integrity. We have to create a space for remediation. We have to counsel women and children and be with them. The definition of mediation describes it as a structured process. The mediator is a third party who is there to mediate, efficiently mediate from an impartial perspective and with specific skills. There's a European directive that was ratified by France about this. Mediation in the healthcare sector has to intervene in anything that endangers physical safety. So our role is to ensure communication, but it should not enter in a contradiction with public law. France has been reluctant for a long time in introducing legislation about violence against women. And the acknowledgement of this fact is quite recent. It was in 1980 when there was a first legal acknowledgement of rape. And then it became one of the top priorities of public health. And because we have really disquieting figures. From 2014 to 2016, There has been a fourth interministerial plan for prevention and fight and eradication of gender violence. In that plan, we have three priorities: reinforced device, first to organize public action, secondly to protect victims, efficiently protect victims, and mediation has a role to play here. Third, to mobilize society as a whole, organizations and NGOs. We have to inform, we have to mobilize, and we have to act in internet, in the healthcare sector, at universities, at schools, and in the sports field. The profile of victims: sexual violence against wives and violence in intimate partnerships. Here, the criterion of age is also relevant. Between 18 and 25, and also the different categories that we are discussing. There's also administrative violence. When, for example, the ID is stolen, that is also a form of violence. Then there are also legal violence and medical violence. We have a healthcare sector with special units for sexual violence and other forms of violence. There are medical experts who have a key role to play in that field. Violence in each step of life becomes a life-threatening event. Before children are born, during childhood, during adolescence, young age, adulthood, and elderly years. All forms of violence is linked to inhuman treatment. Violence of any kind and degree, and insidious violence, silent violence is what we see. Violence and its repercussion. Insidious violence has an effect on the psyche of vulnerable children, and many times they are kept silent. They keep silent when they see, society keeps silent, and the children keep silent when they see that the mother is being subjected to violence. Most important measures in the plan: the budget in France has been doubled. We have a single figure, a single number, a toll-free number that works 24/7, 3919. That's the number women can use. Europe also provides the case law of the Court of Strasbourg. We also have the protection and punishment included, for example, Article 2, violation of the right to life, Article 3, degrading treatment, violations of Article 8, the right to private life and family life, violations of Article 14, and the prohibition of discrimination. For example, Remia et al. Against Moldova. Regarding domestic violence, the court ruled in 2013 that the authorities that did not take any efficient measure were to be found guilty. Daughters of that particular woman were affected by seeing violence in the family. Another example, on 9th July 2009, Opus versus Turkey. This is a sentence against domestic violence. The husband had stabbed his wife, he had killed her, and he killed the mother of this daughter. These are two examples. France was also marked by the different stages in international law. To conclude, there's a social outcry against violence, and mediation is needed to work together with the victims and their families. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Brillante exposición. Ahora tenemos posibilidad de comentar.
Well, I was thinking, I'm very much hope that we have questions or comments from the floor after this presentation. Yes, I can see a hand over there. If you can pass the roving mic, please. Well, first of all, I really want to thank you for your presentation. And I have two questions, if I may, because in Spain, we're now awaiting a likely possible modification of the civil code where joint custody will be adjusted in most cases. And I believe that in France you have a longer tradition of joint custody than us. And I wanted to ask you, do you know of any studies, any information about how children experience joint custody when there is no agreement, previous agreement of the parents, that that's what they want, and it's still awarded by the court? And then the second question is that I understand that family mediation in France can also be applicable in cases of families where there has been gender violence. Is that so? And where the woman has placed a formal complaint?
You told me about agreement, that's right?
Bueno, hablábamos de consentimiento. Si hay consentimiento, no, perdón, creo que se me ha ido un poco la pregunta.
I'm sorry, but it's very difficult for me.
Sí, me resulta muy difícil expresarme en un idioma que no es el mío.
Eran dos preguntas. Una, si existe algún estudio.
Yes, two questions. Have you got any information or studies in France for us to understand how children experience joint custody when it's been imposed by the court, when there is no agreement, previous agreement of the parents, right? And then the second question is whether family mediation in France can be possible when there is a formal complaint of gender violence.
About family mediation, it's now very often in France, and it's obligatory now in family mediation, for family mediation before process. And for the first question, I haven't answered. I'm sorry.
No tengo respuesta a la primera pregunta, no tengo información. Ya lo siento.
Por favor.
Any further questions or comments from the floor? Yes, please. Well, first and foremost, I would like to thank you for your presentation, and I have two questions. How many murders are there in France in that area that you defined as a family environment or intimate partnerships or whatever we call it? How many killings do you have a year in France? And the second question is because you told us about that case where the court condemned the public authorities that had not intervened. And I was wondering which public institutions? Was it the judiciary, the administrative institutions, and what kind of sanction or penalty or how were those? I suppose it was the administrative institutions that were punished and how they were punished exactly. I also wanted to ask you what kind of resources do women who suffer from gender violence have access to, as in subsidies?
You know, in France, you must go to the policy to make a paper, and also we have a special service, les urgences médico-judiciaires, urgency, medical justice, and we have a lot of doctors, specialists for this problem, and they are very active in for this problem, for this violence. And they are in relation with the policy and with the justice. And directly, it's possible to have a process.
La administración judicial, y ahí pueden intervenir directamente en el proceso.
Okay. ¿Alguien más?
Any further questions or comments from the floor?
Bien, si no hay ningún otro comentario o pregunta.
Right, if there are no further questions or comments, I will ask for a warm round of applause for our speaker.
Y esperaremos a que venga el próximo.
And we will shortly start with the second panel this morning.